and welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I'm very pleased today to have a special guest host with me. Mr. Sean Farris is here on the show, everybody. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thanks for having me, Angela.
And Sean and I have been friends for a long time, and he was last on the show 14 years ago, which he remembered. I did not, in 2008, you said, right?
Yes.
So Sean and his family are part of a filmmaking collective, Chop Motion Films, as well as a musical group, Mysterious Sailor, and they happen to be one of my favorite musical acts right now happening, and for actually a while, you've been one of my favorite bands in the area. And then, of course, our intro that you get to watch every time you watch Real Film Snobs is done by Chop Motion. So I remember after I met you guys, which I think was at a film festival at the Elsinore, if I
I
remember, at
believe
the Elsinore
so.
Theater back in the day.
Yeah.
Don't remember the name of the film festival right now, but I was a judge on the film festival panel and I saw one of your films and I was blown away by it. I think it was actually your brother Evan's film, Larry the Amazing Spider. And I was really blown away by it. And I said, I have to meet these guys. And so, and I did. And then commissioned you to do the intro for Real Film Snobs. And then it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship, shall we say.
Yes, a very beautiful friendship.
So, of course, you make films, you make music, art, multi-talented family. So, Sean, I know that your taste tends to go in the darker direction, and we're going to be reviewing some pretty dark underground animated films today. But maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about some of your favorite films and maybe films that have influenced you quite a bit as a filmmaker.
Yeah. When I run down the list, I feel a little bit sheepish because there's a lot of familiar, of course, I feel like you can't get much better than Stanley Kubrick, David Lynch, some of these kind of dark and strange directors that are very well known and certainly talked about ad nauseum. So, but also some other filmmakers I really like are Todd Solondz. He does some pretty great black comedies. I feel like I don't hear a lot about him. I wish there was more. He was more talked about, actually. I love Todd Haynes, and Night of the Hunter pretty much is at the top of the list for best movies of all time for me. So definitely veers on the dark side, but not too dark, I think. I think there's a lot of, there's some pretty sick movies out there that even I don't like.
Yeah,
But
right.
it's kind of
I
like to
think
flirt.
dark with a tinge of humor is kind of, which is also your style, I think,
Yeah, there's
not
just,
gruesome dark, but yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of humor there because sometimes all you can do is laugh kind of at the darkness that's reflected in our world.
Right. I could think of some of your films, of Chop Motion's films, that have definitely some dark, almost kind of icky moments, which the film you picked, actually, we'll get to that in a little bit, to remind me a lot of some of your work in terms of having oozy, gross, it's more like ooh
Sure.
type than just like, oh, but type moments, but also it's just like amazing creativity and also real touches of beauty, which I think is another thing. Like I've always thought, your films have a real, like there's a melancholy there and kind of a mysticism and beauty to them, at the same time being very grounded in kind of the icky realities of being on Earth. So that would be my
It's
description.
I think it's a very well balanced meal, kind of the light and the dark. So
Yeah, exactly. So we decided, which even though it's a little on the nose, to talk about animated films today because they're so underappreciated, I feel like. I mean, they have their following, but even at this year's Academy Awards, the animators have actually protest saying that they have continued to be shut out. And the great filmmaker Guillermo del Toro took to the internet to say that, animation should just be considered another medium rather than a genre, because you can make any style of film an animated film. One of my favorite films of last year, Flea, was a documentary that was animated and a foreign film, and it was one of my all-time favorites of last year. And it was very realistic type of animation as opposed to the horror animation or comedy animation. A lot of people are only familiar with like the Disney style or kids animation, but there's a lot more to animation than that. It's really a medium, just like shooting your movie in black and white versus color, or shooting a movie digital versus on film. So at least that's the way I think of it. So we'll launch right in. We each picked two underground animated films that we wanted to talk about. My first pick is The Wolf House from 2018. It's about a woman named Maria who takes refuge in a house after escaping from a German colony in Chile. This film was very critically acclaimed when it came out in 2018. It took me a while to find it because it is a very odd movie, and so it didn't get a lot of distribution. It is what I would call a stop motion animation horror film, and it's very horrific. It is based on real events. There was a colony run by a Nazi in Chile, and the colony was run but on behalf of the Chilean dictator Pinochet. And this Nazi committed all sorts of horrific atrocities over the years, including, murdering people and then child abuse as well. And so this film takes its launching off point from that as a work of fiction. This girl has, escaped this colony with these two little pigs that she has taken with her, and then begins to find that the house itself that she's taken refuge in is sort of like a sentient being, and is hearing and talking to her and pushing her to realize all sorts of things that happened to her in the colony. So it's kind of hard to just explain. I think it's one that you won't understand the plot necessarily from watching it. You'll have to read about it later, like I did on Google. However, the animation is just what floored me in this film. It's stop motion, but it's not the stop motion you might associate with something like the Shaun the Sheep movies, which is one, I don't know why that's the first thing that came to my mind. But the Aardman productions have that kind of cute, whimsical type stop motion. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. It's like the opposite of that. It's very sophisticated. It took the filmmakers 5 years to make this, and you really see it on every frame of the movie. So I'm excited to hear what you thought of it, Sean.
Well, I did love the movie. I love the animation style. It's absolutely beautiful and dark and strange. And pretty much you start the movie and you're in this dilapidated house and you're seeing animations painted on the wall, frame by frame, things moving, large puppets that take up like the size of a whole wall. And there's just a lot to look at from beginning to end. And it's quite a trip.
I'm curious from a technical standpoint, because you know the technical aspect of making animated films much more than I do. What do you think kind of singled this movie out? Because to me, I was just watching it going, oh my gosh, how did they do that? Because I don't know the technical aspects of stop motion, but to me, it looked so different from other stop motion films I've watched.
Well, yeah, from what I saw, it looked like most of this stuff was in camera, and my best guess, I don't know for sure, but my best guess is they just had a lot of time to do this, and patience and care they must have, because again, most of this stuff looks like it's just happening on screen. It doesn't look like there's any digital tricks going on here. It's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of this crazy kind of herky-jerky stuff happening. The camera is kind of constantly shifting and moving. It almost feels like it's all done in one take. It's not, but it sort of has that feel to it, and it's just kind of relentless.
Right. And the constant shifting, I mean, talk about a visual feast for the eyes, but it almost gets overwhelming. While I was like watching, like, where should I be putting my eyes? Because as the characters, things are happening and there's voiceover explaining what's going on with them. The walls behind her, as you mentioned, are shifting. The paint pictures, the characters themselves, their bodies change. The pig turns into a child and then turns back into a pig. And so it's very, gosh, I don't even know the word for it, but mind melding is one of the things that came to my mind when I was watching it. And there was lots of it where I was like, I'm not even sure how they did that. It's definitely not your typical. I mean, I brought up the Shaun the Sheep movies because you could tell, it's not like here's a little character I put on the screen and it's, this little sheep character and and we've just shot it frame by frame. Some of the things on here I was like going, how did they do that? And I think, like you said, the care and methodical nature of it, it just must have been quite the endeavor. And it's only the
Yeah,
film's like just a little over an hour, but I think because it is so complicated, it probably took them a while to do that.
yeah. This is very far away from Shaun the Sheep, in a very different universe than Shaun the Sheep. And that would be, I wouldn't even say it's a critique, but I sort of agree with what you said, where it's a little overwhelming. And so I think this is a little over an hour long. And by the end of it, I think it's just the right length. I think if it had gone on too much longer, it might have been too much. It's like
Yeah.
maybe too much of a good thing.
it's almost like your eyes can't take in anymore. I remember there's seeing some critiques sometimes of Wes Anderson's films because they're art directed to death and there's so much going on in the backgrounds of his films. This is nothing like his films because it doesn't have that kind of whimsy. But I'm thinking about when you have so much visually going on screen, it's like you're at some point your brain can't even take in anymore. So um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but I really liked this. I'm glad I got to show it to you. It is available online streaming on a service called Canopy, which is a free service people can get through their library system. It's not easy to find, but you can find it through there. So we should move on to your next movie because I'm very excited to review this one.
Yes, the first movie that I chose is called The Secret Adventures of Tom Thumb. It's directed by David Borthwick. It's from 1993. This is also a stop motion animated feature film, or well, it's a mixture of stop motion and then what some might call pixelation animation, which is that's a technique where you have live actors moving frame by frame in the shots as well. So it's kind of melding those two things together, sometimes within the same shot. So the story of this begins in an artificial insemination factory where a mishap results in the birth of the title character, Tom Thumb. And in this movie, he kind of takes on the appearance of a sort of a misshapen little, almost looks like a fetus or a premature baby. So Tom's parents, Ma and Pa Thumb, they're played by live actors in the pixelation method, moving frame by frame. So they're loving parents, but not after a while, he's ripped away by dark forces and he kind of goes on his journey through this oppressive dystopian world full of nightmares and genetic mutations and just a seemingly endless supply of insects moving around in stop motion. It seems in every single shot, there's either a bug in the background or a foreground. There's just insects everywhere
There's a
crawling
lot of
over.
bugs.
A lot of bugs. So if you like stop motion bugs, this is the movie for you. Um, anyhow, so I chose this partly because we first saw it in Hollywood Video a long time ago when I was a kid, me and my older brother Michael, and so we rented it. It just looked kind of strange and interesting, and I've just always had a lot of affection for this movie. As you noticed, it did kind of have an influence maybe on some of my sensibilities and the worlds we create. There's a little bit of an influence there. So and it's very sad and dark and weird and all that, but I feel like this movie has kind of an emotional narrative core in there somewhere that you can kind of latch onto, and I think it deals with a lot of interesting ideas. But I'm curious what you thought of it.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think of your films when I was watching this one, particularly actually the usage of the what you call pixelation. So I would call live action, but sort of with the actors, like real live actors moving within the frame and then being, sort of there. I would, yeah, and then with the animation on top of that, it reminded me actually the most of your most recent film, which I was just trying to find the name of it online, and you've taken it down because I think you guys are still working on it. But it reminded me of elements of that, particularly. I know Michael in the most recent film plays this guy who's like sitting in this room and all these gross things are happening. And that reminded me of some of the things in this film with like the constant bugs. I don't know where they're living, where there's so many flies and bugs, but people are always just like squashing bugs in this movie. But it does have this really kind of like sadness to it because the character of Tom Thumb is trying to find his parents and then they're taken from him and his father almost gets him back at one point, to give anything away, but it's very sad, and he's a really kind of creepy little kind of being, like you said, almost kind of like fetus looking thing, and there's, I think they're these filmmakers British. It
Yes.
seemed it's very British feeling and kind of that dark British humor that you get. And so, but some amazing visuals. Talk about hard to find. I found this movie on YouTube. So if you just type in The Secret Adventures of Tom Thumb, the whole movie is uploaded onto YouTube for free. That's the only place I could find it. It wasn't on any streaming services, which is sort of remarkable in this day and age.
Right. Yeah, I was surprised to see that it's not streaming anywhere. And I'm lucky. I mean, I bought a DVD copy way back in the day. I don't even think that you could find it on Blu-ray. Um, But yeah, YouTube is the way to watch it currently.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I watched the absolute most amazing visual. I mean, I don't know if the visuals were great because sometimes the YouTube uploads are not bad. But you said you checked it out and it wasn't too much different than the original.
Not
It's
too.
got it's a rougher look
Yeah,
than
it doesn't
for
look
instance, Wolf House. Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. So you won't be able to see this probably in HD. It'll have to be standard definition, but the visuals are very striking and beautiful. And sometimes I just love to still see things that were really shot on film. And there's kind of
Yeah.
a 90s avant-garde aesthetic and kind of, like you said, a British aesthetic to this too that I just really like and kind of nostalgic for.
Have you watched any of this filmmaker's other films? Because it is kind of also a filmmaking group, it seems like, and I think he made other films.
Yeah, I haven't. I've seen some of the short films. I've seen they made a really good short film called The Saint Inspector,
Mm,
but I haven't seen. They made another movie. I think it was released here as Dougal, and it was just sort of a vanilla kids movie and CGI, and
yeah,
it got
trying to
pretty.
get some money, maybe.
Maybe they just, yeah, maybe Tom Thumb didn't make them enough money, so they needed to go in a different direction. But I saw some pretty bad reviews for that one, unfortunately. And then I think the director, David Borthwick, I think he passed away actually. I didn't
Oh,
realize
okay,
this sometime in the past few years, but I think the collective he was a part of was called Bolex Brothers, and he worked with some
right.
other people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was saying was that because I saw something like a film by the Bullocks brothers. So, yeah, so I'm definitely glad I got to see this. It really gave me some insights into your brain as well, which, that's an interesting place to be.
Well, thank
Okay,
you.
so should we move on to our next film?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. The other film I chose, it's one I have not seen before. I always wanted, or well, I can't say I always wanted to. I was only really made aware of it kind of recently. But anyway, it's called Belladonna of Sadness. It's directed by Eiichi Yamamoto. It's from 1973. It tells the story of a French medieval peasant named Jeanne who is viciously raped by the local baron of her village and his court on her wedding night. She is then visited by the devil, who is in the form of a phallic spirit, and she strikes a deal, her soul in exchange for power. So she uses this power to kind of gain riches and influence in the town. And she sort of leads this kind of a semi-satanic, orgiastic kind of a revolt against the baron. And I would say that probably sums up the plot as well as you can in a
Yeah,
nutshell.
and
Um,
FYI, not a kids movie.
Not a
So,
kids movie. No, this is
no.
far
Did you have
from
to
it.
keep your little ones away when you were watching this?
Well, I knew it had some pretty adult stuff in it. And so our oldest was 13. He was in the room when the movie started. Within a few minutes, we paused it and said, let's go. Why don't you go ahead and go to the other room?
Yeah.
I was like, so I didn't actually realize it was quite as explicit as it was. That being said, it could have been worse.
So, did you like the movie?
Oh, I would say it's probably my least favorite of the movies that we have lined up today. Um, I feel like I was drawn to it because of the visuals and the design of it is amazing. I'd seen I think a clip of it on Instagram,
Yeah.
and I really just a few a snippet where I saw these visuals, and there's kind of a sleazy 70s aesthetic to this that I was kind of like, oh, maybe I'd like this. Um, it kind of almost felt like it's an adult film from the 70s. It sort of has that kind of I wouldn't say it's a porno. It's not anything like that, but maybe it was designed more for titillation, but they kind of tacked on a little bit of a feminist message to it. I'm not sure if it's really a feminist movie or not. I think there's some
I
debate
don't know.
about
It's pretty
that.
misogynistic in part, so
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to, because the woman is, and not just because she's, raped and sexually exploited over and over, but just that she's such a only a sexualized being in the film, and so I think that's part of the,
right,
yeah. But it is one of these animated films where you're like, wow, the animation's amazing. The story is just sort of, eh. Like I felt like the story was, kind of like I could almost care less about what was happening. I just wanted to look at the visuals and parts
right,
of it. And that because of that, it felt like too long. It's interesting. We would review The Wolf House and said that one was just the right length. They actually had plenty of story there. It was just because that one was so overwhelming. And this one, I actually got a little bit bored towards the end because I started feeling like, okay, the story wasn't really capturing me, and so I felt like, okay, we could wrap it up anytime now. So I agree
Yeah.
with you on that.
Yeah, I would say the same. And as gorgeous as the movie is, a lot of it too, you're seeing there's the animated parts that are actually animated are quite beautiful, and there's some powerful imagery in it. But a lot of it too is kind of that thing where they would are just sort of panning across pictures, and so you're almost watching like a storyboard with
Hmm.
voiceover. And you can tell a story that way, that's fine, but it leaves a little bit to be desired, especially when, like you said, the story is not something that you particularly care too much about.
Yeah, exactly. No, I totally agree with you on this one. And this is also my least favorite of the four. But I think, the animation style, it's definitely had a cult following, I think, because it is so sexual and titillating. And it kind of lends itself to, I mean, later on, of course, Japanese animation just exploded. And including, more animation for grown-ups that they've done in Japanese cinema. I think of movies like Paprika, which is just so far superior to this one, but I think this one kind of led the way for that style of more grown-up themes in Japanese animation. So although it's based on actually a French story, which is just is what it is, but sort of funny. So
Yeah.
anyway, we'll move on to our next film, which is The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, and I'm really excited to review this film. A few years ago, I really got into the films of Lotte Reiniger, and this one was her first full-length feature animated film from 1926, and it's actually the earliest feature-length animated film that exists. There were earlier ones shot, but they did not survive, as happens with film history. So this is actually the earliest surviving full-length animated film. And it's based on the Arabian Nights, so it follows, this prince as he goes on these various adventures. You don't need it. The plot is, again, not super central, although I would say this one is more interesting plot-wise than our last film. What Lotte really pioneered is what they call a technique of film of animation called silhouette, where you have movable cardboard and cutouts that are kind of posed in front of illuminated glass. That's kind of the best way to describe it. It's really it's like shadow puppets, and she was very based on what they called at the time shadow puppets from like Oriental theater back in the turn of the century, of the last century, not this century. And so she was very influenced by that and pioneered this style of filmmaking. And there's a big collection of her films on the Criterion Channel, and Real Film Snobs should have the Criterion Channel, so hopefully you have it. But you can find her films in other places as well. She's kind of considered one of the pioneers of animation, quite honestly. So I'm super excited to hear what you thought of it, Sean.
I loved this movie. I instantly have affection for this movie. I just and I was a little bit aware of the filmmaker before, obviously not very aware, and I read up a little bit more, and it's just amazing how groundbreaking and influential she was, and she really helped to pioneer like the multi-plane camera techniques that they go on to use in Disney and all this stuff.
Can you
I feel
explain for
like,
the audience what multi-plane technique is?
well, that's when you have the layers stacked up in the camera, up bird's eye overhead, so you can film the different layers of backgrounds for cell animation. And so they obviously use that extensively in Disney movies and early Disney movies. But I was reading that with what she did in movies like this, she helped to kind of pioneer that technique, just with the layering of the backgrounds. And just this is a beautiful movie. I was really struck by the scope of it and the ambition that I'm watching a movie from 1926, directed by this German lady filmmaker, and you're seeing hordes of demons and wizard battles and all this adventure that's happening, and the
Yeah.
characterization in such a limited form is very successful, even though you're just seeing sort of the outline and the shape. I feel like your imagination, your brain kind of fills it in and comes alive. And so it's an excellent film, and I'm very glad to have seen it.
Yeah, I feel like this is an example of less can sometimes be more. I actually think this is a far better film than Belladonna of Sadness, which is from the 70s, where they could have had more advanced techniques. but this one is actually more impressive, I think, in some ways technically. The fact that in 1926, not only do they have the multiplane that you mentioned, her usage of colors and the way it was just gorgeous to look at. I mean, every shot is gorgeous. You have the characterizations that as his journey goes on, that you just, and like you said, your brain, sometimes the minimalist style of animation lets your brain kind of do more imagining for you, and so you do fill in those blanks. And she went on to do mostly shorts. She did do some other feature length, but most of her films were shorts, and there's a big collection of her shorts out there and on the Criterion channel. I encourage people to check them out. She worked in this style, and then she lived into the 1980s, and actually her whole career became kind of the expert on silhouette technique, and lectured on that technique. And it's really cool for people. And I really wanted to review this one partially because I thought it would be neat to have a different style of animation, because we had a 2 stop motion, and then Belladonna is more your traditional hand drawn. And so I thought it would be neat to have another, because there's so many styles of animation out there. I don't know if everyone always realizes when you're talking animation that there's, I don't know, probably you could list a lot more than I can, but there's a lot of styles that, where we only see really in the mainstream very limited types.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty endless what you can do with animation. The sky's the limit.
Yeah. So speaking of which, what are you working on right now? Are you working on any projects that you'd like to tell the audience about while we have a minute?
Yes. Yeah, we are working on kind of concurrently with the band. We are putting the finishing touches on a new album finally. And along with that, there will be music videos. We've done music videos for other people, so we figure we have to at least do one music video for one of our songs. So that will be coming up shortly, hopefully this year with all that.
I hope. It's been how many years in the making? We won't say how long. A long time.
Maybe I won't say.
Yeah, a long time, but it's going to be worth it when the album comes out. I'm really excited. We got to do a release party or something. And then, of course, it will be awesome to see the videos to go with it. So, and of course, hopefully that you guys, I would just love for all of you to, eventually be able to make your own 1 hour full length feature. So, something that gets the kind of distribution even that the Wolf House did would be awesome. So
that would be awesome. Yes, I agree.
Yes. Yeah. So as always, thank you so much, Sean, for being on the show. I hope you join me again. Well, next time we're going to probably do our next idea, if the audience wants to see it, as feel bad films. So not animated necessarily, just downer films, because we all need to be down a little bit more right now than we already are.
That's correct. Yes.
Yes. So as always, you can go to our website, realfilmsnobs.com. We're on YouTube, and you just have to hit that little bell and subscribe, and then you get notified when we have new episodes. So please do that. We're on Facebook and Twitter. I'd like to thank our fantastic editor and all crew extraordinaire, Brad Wortman, for taping the show, and Jason for website and graphics, Brian Hart for graphics, and let's see, sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors for continuing to stick with us. We have a podcast now, so please check out our podcast. We're on CC Media in Salem, Scan TV in Silverton, Corvallis Access Media, KMUZ Radio, and KMWV Radio in Salem. As always, have a great day and great movies. Thank you.